Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and a Happy New Year. I'm Mike Redford, and this is the follow-up. Coming up on tonight's show, it's been a messy start for congressional Republicans who have a new majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. It took many days to vote in the new House Speaker, and now many are questioning if they can lead effectively over the next 2 years. David Jesuit from Central Michigan University is here with his perspective. Plus, Governor Whitmer has begun her second term with a new list of priorities, including repealing right to work, something union officials have been advocating for her to do, while critics say repealing right to work would be bad for business. Jarrett Skorup from the Mackinac Center for Public Policy is here as well to talk about that. But first, we would like to hear from you to help drive the conversation here on the show. You can do that in a variety of ways via social media on Facebook and Twitter. You can email us, or you can dial into our follow-up hotline to voice your opinion or suggest future show topics. And if you'd like to watch any of our past shows this season, just log on to deltapublicmedia.org. Well, first, dialing remotely, David Jesuit, political science professor at Central Michigan University. He is a regular here on the follow-up, and he's back again for the new year. Good to see you again, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Let's get into it. It took the GOP, 4 days, 15 votes to land a House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. It's been, more than 100 years since something like that ever happened. It's not a good look for the Republicans any way you slice it. So I'm going to throw this out. Is it simply democracy in action, which some of the GOP folks would say, or do you see this as GOP leadership that just doesn't have its act together?
Well, I'd say it's more democracy in action, certainly Speaker. Now we can say Speaker McCarthy would have preferred to had this all, all of his ducks in a row, so to speak, all his votes lined up before taking it to the floor and making it public. But that was part of the strategy to get those final votes is to increase some pressure on the holdouts. But overall, it was 100 years since the last time there was more than one vote, and we have to go back to the 1850s when there were even more votes were required to elect a speaker. But this 15 votes, he's speaker. I think that I know I enjoyed watching it, the debate occurring. And speaking to my students in my classes here at CMU, they're political science students, so they're already tuned into politics. But I think that we learned something about the way that the House works by just by watching it occur live.
Yeah.
I thought that was great.
The one thing people talked about, even the national commentators would say, why didn't they have this all resolved, wrapped up in a nice bow before they avoided this sort of messy public battle? But I think you would contend it was sort of strategic. It had to play out in the media, which added a little bit more pressure, right?
Yeah, I mean, the holdouts wanted some attention, for sure, and they were able to do that. And so I think McCarthy realized he wasn't going to get those votes unless he took it to the floor. And then he had hoped that over the days it took, and we saw it finally worked. I mean, they did it before the weekend, and that was really, I think, the most exciting part was when it looked like they were going to adjourn, and then we saw McCarthy go right over to Matt Gaetz and really confront him, try to strike a bargain right there,
Mm-hmm.
and that angered Congressman Rogers from Alabama, and we saw that bit of a confrontation that occurred. But then things changed so quickly, and he realized he had the votes. I mean, that's the way that. Of course, he wanted it to go more smoothly, but
Right.
at the end of the day, it worked. I
Right.
mean, the public pressure of having all those votes it got him the holdouts. and it probably gave him a little bit more leverage in cutting the deals, presumably. And we don't know all the details of the deals that were cut,
Exactly.
and that's a bit of a controversy right now. But presumably, he got a little bit more leverage and was able to, give them a little bit more, and the holdouts were feeling some pressure, and they gave up a little bit more. So I think at the end of the day, um, it led us to a deal. It was democracy in action, and
Right.
it's not going to be pretty all the time.
Yeah, we didn't get all the inside baseball on what it was that they were holding out for. Was it personable? Or was it legitimate? We really didn't know, but we probably will know more as we go forward. And on that issue, I mean, McCarthy ultimately negotiated, or some would use the term caved in, right? Giving lots of concessions. For example, allowing for just one House member to call for a vote to have him sort of step aside if they choose to do that at any point, and also to give up high-powered maybe committee assignments. So some would say, did he give up too much? And what does that say about sort of the leadership moving forward? I mean, so what's your take on that?
Well, I'm not concerned about the one person. Personally, I mean, one Congress person, having the ability to essentially have a vote of confidence in the Speaker of the House, because it would require a majority anyway. So, and there's precedent for that. Uh, I mean, yeah, I guess it weakens the Speaker, but I don't, by just a little bit. Uh, Giving up those chair positions, that was, those are powerful positions. And so, that's more significant. And I would say the most significant thing has to do with the budget. And so, when you and I were talking before, I think that, okay, they worked out some differences. We have a Speaker of the House right now, but I don't think he's going to last beyond summer. I give him maybe 6 months, and I say that because my understanding is it'll be around July that the debt ceiling will need to be raised, and the Republicans have already indicated, the Freedom Caucus, the holdouts, that they're not going to budge on that. And we'll go back to the end of 2011, where I think we're headed toward a government shutdown. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but I would not make any plans to travel to any national parks in July. I think that and that's where I think that probably he doesn't survive the kind of fights that will occur between some moderate Republicans. I think there are 10 Republicans who are elected in districts that Joe Biden won, and there are other more moderate Republicans, and they want to be reelected too, and so they're feeling that they were left out by the deals that were cut for the Freedom Caucus, and I'm not sure you could how far that they could push those other moderate Republicans when so much is at stake. Because there's a lot if the government defaults, there will be enormous negative, I think, consequences to that, and I don't think that we want that to occur. So, and the cuts to discretionary spending. I mean, look, more than half of that $1.7 trillion in the budget deal that was cut at the end of last year, it's $1.7 trillion. More than half of that is for national defense. And so if you were going to cut the budget, as the Freedom Caucus has said that, this is if we're going to vote for you, you got to start here. This is our position.
Sure.
And then you're going to cut into defense spending. There's just no way. I mean, it's more than half the discretionary budget. I don't see how you could get to that number without cutting defense. And we've already heard Republican members saying there's no way we're going to go along with cutting defense spending. And so we can see already that, the path forward is not going to be easy for Speaker McCarthy.
Right. It'd be interesting how that plays out, as you mentioned, sort of the potential government shutdown. The debt ceiling continues to be rising, administration after administration, but eventually it could lead to that. We'll see how that plays out. One other area I want to get in before I let you go. So Kevin McCarthy obviously was a longtime supporter of President Trump. Trump endorsed McCarthy for the House speakership. I mean, some of the members even called President Trump in the chambers there at the height of the debate. You saw cell phones going back and forth. One congressman had DT on the phone during this debate, endless voting. So, but at the end of the day, it's another indication that sort of the Trump effect continues to weaken like it did in the midterms.
Well, I don't think it's really weakening in the Republican base, and not with members of the Freedom Caucus. And so, he was nominated by Matt Gaetz, I think at least twice, for Speaker of the House. The Constitution doesn't say that Speaker of the House, and it's a constitutional position, has to be a member of Congress. And so, it's clear that he's very popular in Matt Gaetz's district, and he's very popular with the base. And yes, I don't think that he's as popular with more moderate Republicans and independents. But if you're trying to move Republican members, and you're trying to move Matt Gaetz, for example, and other holdouts from the Freedom Caucus, I think Donald Trump is going to have some leverage there, and I think it probably helped McCarthy. Well, McCarthy came out and he thanked former President Trump, so he thinks at least that it helped him seal the deal.
That's very interesting. Well, with that, I'll leave it at that with your comments. Appreciate you having on the show. We'll see how all this plays out, and thanks for joining me in the new year, and we'll do it again in the near future. Thanks.
Thanks again.
Take care. We're going to change gears, and we're going to change guests. I'm going to bring on Jarrett Skorup. He's the Director of Marketing and Communications with the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Jarrett, good to see you.
Good to see you.
We're going to switch from national politics to state politics, specifically talk about Governor Whitmer as she begins her second term. She begins that second term with a whole list of priorities, actually, and she also has the Democratic House and Senate on her hands now, which is an advantage. We're not going to touch on all our priorities. We're going to touch on one for our segment, the issue of her thoughts on maybe repealing right to work, something that Governor Snyder put in about 10 years ago. So let's just start with sort of let our viewers know, define sort of what right to work is.
Yeah, so right to work really, it's a very simple law. About half of states have it, and it simply says that anyone who, no worker can be required to join a union or pay dues or fees in order to hold a job. So they basically cannot be fired for refusing to support a union.
So with that, and we have some information on the screen there for our viewers that essentially kind of what you said in terms of that's not something they have to do when they join a union. Again, it was put in place in Michigan about 10 years ago. Most thought it could never happen. I mean, he was a business guy. Somehow he made it happen in a state like Michigan where unions have a lot of clout. I remember when they sort of stormed the Capitol, as we talked about before, the first time. But he pulled it off. Can you give us a sense as to what benefit that sort of has had on the state over the last 10 years?
Yeah, so the law went into place almost exactly 10 years ago. Michigan, really the birthplace of organized labor. And at the turn of the century, 2000, we had the second highest percentage of our workers who were unionized. The thing that happened was the first decade of the 2000s, we really went through a severe one-state recession, the worst state recession, one of the worst state recessions in 100 years. It lasted for years. A lot of your viewers, the viewers probably remember that.
Sure. And
so leading up to 2012, there was a lot of, well, what can we do? What's one thing we can do? And right to work law rose to kind of the top of the list and was something that was put into effect. I think most of the results have been positive economically. So a lot of large employers, particularly large manufacturers that want to expand or move to a state, they will only look at states that have a right to work law. That's about half the states. So about almost exactly half the states are right to work and half non-right to work. And we were coming out of a recession, but since that law has been in place, we've had very steady job growth. Our wages are up about 30% since then. In the 10 years prior to the law, we lost about 20% of our overall income, and our manufacturing employment in a lot of these heavily unionized areas and road building and construction, we've gained a lot of jobs in those areas. So I think economically, we would argue that right to work's been really good for Michigan.
Ironically, repealing right to work wasn't a big issue during Governor Whitmer's sort of re-election campaign, although she's on record of not being an advocate of right to work, certainly during her time as a state legislature back in the day. Do you think strategically she didn't make mention of it, didn't become a focus of her re-election campaign, and then got elected? Just kind of put it in her back pocket a little bit there?
Yeah, I mean, the governor she was a state senator previously. She opposed the law when it went through, so I don't think there's any secret she opposes right to work. But yeah, this has not been a campaign issue in Michigan. It was mentioned, if it was mentioned at all, it was very few legislative campaigns, and it was not mentioned in the gubernatorial campaign. So now the question is, for the first time in 40 years, we have full Democratic control of the state House, the state Senate, and the governor's race, and it's a very narrow majority. If one Democrat votes against the law and aligns with all the Republicans, then the vote would fail. So, I mean, I think that's the thing that you weigh as a politician. You know, we didn't really run on this. It's very contentious.
Right.
On the other hand, our base of some of our voters, and certainly our donors, labor unions are the #1 funder of the Democratic Party, they're weighing that consideration as well.
Yeah, it's an issue that maybe she won't lead with in the first 4 or 5 months. She may throw it out there. She probably has some bigger rocks to contend with. You're talking about tax relief and maybe some gun control stuff that she hinted on when she did the inauguration here a week or so ago. We may hear more in the State of the State on the 25th later this month. So I'm going to play the union side of it here, right? Union leaders obviously backing the repealing of right to work. They claim it's unfair for workers not have to pay union dues, as we said, but get the full benefits of union contracts. You and I talked about these terms. Some call it, the free rider or the free loader. So how do you counter that?
Well, I got to say, so most of the male members of my family are union members, and you were much nicer to how you put that than I'm used to hearing at the family gathering.
It's a clean show.
Yeah,
okay?
Arguing about this issue. So a key argument on right to work is this freeloader argument, essentially that somebody's benefiting from the contract and they don't want to pay the dues to do it. My main response is I agree that that's an issue, and the state legislatures, they could pass a law saying that if you're not a member of a union, you don't take part in the contract. But unions argue against that. Even if somebody is, so when my wife was a public school teacher, when my sister and my father, and they're in these unionized environments, they might say, I don't want to be a member of the union, let me work out a deal with the employer on my own. But unions don't want that. They want everybody under the contract. It strengthens them at the bargaining agreement. So they're the ones that tend to argue against that. And they've argued against it at the legislature. They argue against it at the court. So to the extent it's a problem, it's not really one that they seem to care too much about. And then the only other point I'd say is there's lots of groups out there that people are voluntary members of that benefit all of us. The state, local, and state chamber of commerce. So every town has a chamber of commerce. You voluntarily become a member for that. If you're a business, you don't have to join it, and they're still going to do work that will still benefit you as a local business. But the government doesn't come in and say, hey, if you're here in Saginaw or Bay City and you're a business, you have to pay money to the Chamber of Commerce. They say, look, you're free to join, you're free to not, and the chamber will go around and say, we think we will benefit you, but they can't compel anyone to do it, and I think that's how labor unions should operate as well.
And what's interesting for those that don't want to join, I mean, they want to do the work, right? But it's not all about money and paying the union dues. I think the concern for some of those folks saying, well, I just don't really support your stance on certain things, particularly when it comes to like political action committees, that the unions support certain candidates, certain parties that I'm not comfortable with. That's not what I support. So do you think that's sort of a bigger issue for people, that I don't support where the union supports, and that's not fair that my dues are going to support sort of political parties that I don't want to support? Yeah,
so in the 10 years since we've had the law, about 150,000 people have withdrawn for the union memberships. I have heard from many of those, literally thousands of them have called us because they have questions about what the rights, how do they withdraw, what does it mean if they do, what does it mean for the bargaining? And a lot of that is political activity. And some of it is, I disagree with the candidates they're supporting, and other parts of it is, look, they're just too political and I don't want to be involved in that. I agree with them on local contract issues and bargaining. I agree with my local. I don't agree with the national unions, and they want to withdraw. But others, there's all kinds of reasons. There's moral issues, and so, But the political one is certainly a big part of that, and it gets back to that other issue. That it would be outrageous for the state government to tell people, oh, if you want to work somewhere, you have to donate money to the state Republican Party or the state Democratic Party.
Right.
But labor unions give 99% of their funds to one political party, and the government for a long time forced people to pay them money. And that's just, it's a big time fairness issue for me.
I saw Jim Holken speak at actually a Rotary meeting. It was just last week. He's the president, as you know, and CEO of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, and he's afraid that if right to work is repealed, kind of what you touched on, it's a huge step back to Michigan, attracting new business to Michigan. So let's kind of walk through that. What does he mean by that?
Yeah, so the Mackinac Center's done a study, Harvard did a study, and it found that manufacturing employment is much higher when states have a right to work law when they don't. And one of the reasons for that is large manufacturers, that they always have kind of the list over what causes businesses to move, what causes big business in particular to expand. And one of the big reasons near the top of that list on most of those is, does it have a right to work law? Because as soon as you introduce a labor union, and a labor union that can force everybody, compel them to join, it can make a lot of those contract issues very contentious. And so large manufacturers, they're very worried about this job. And here in Michigan, to the extent where we have had slower job growth than most other states coming out of the COVID recession, we are particularly worried about that and trying to get manufacturers to come here and trying to get manufacturers to stay here, trying to get Ford, General Motors, Stellantis to stay here and not continue expanding in the South in non-right to work states. We need them here in Michigan.
And interesting, you mentioned that about sort of the job growth under right to work by and large, right, over the last 10 years. But I think you have some evidence that during Governor Whitmer's first term, she's given out more than her fair share of sort of tax incentives to attract businesses. And this is at a time when right to work is in place. So talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, well, overall, right to work states they've seen more job growth, more manufacturing job growth, higher income growth, and most importantly, population growth. Right to work states have been growing faster in population for decades now. And to me, that's a big issue because that's showing you the true way of how people feel about overall policy issues is how are they voting with their feet, and they tend to be moving to right to work states. Now, coming out of COVID, there's all kinds of different things that Michigan has done that are restrictions on business during that. We've been a slower growing state coming out of the COVID recession, and one of the results of that is that lawmakers and the governor have been putting more and more money into these big select incentive funds or corporate welfare funds if you want to be antagonistic about it. So essentially we have a fund that's $1 billion last year that's trying to get large manufacturers to grow in the state of Michigan. The states that tend to not do so well on job growth are the ones that often have to, I would say, bribe companies to come here and open up. If you get rid of the right to work law, that makes that even tougher. It's even more likely that we're going to have to try to come up with this money to get large manufacturers to grow and expand here. I think we should cut that money out, but I also think a big part of this is that we should be keeping our right to work law so it makes manufacturers more likely to want to be here.
You know, it's interesting. It's a good conversation because we're coming off of the latest census numbers. And just in the last couple of months, we heard that people are leaving Michigan in droves. I think we were fourth in the nation when it came to losing population. Of course, we lost power in Congress and the Senate because of that. So you got to wonder what card the governor's trying to play here. I mean, she's representing her constituents, her base, but she's seeing the same numbers you are, and the numbers don't add up.
Yeah, she should see those numbers. The census numbers showed that right to work states, once again, were the fastest growing states, and forced unionization states were the slowest growing states. And even here in the Midwest, yes, Michigan, a lot of the Midwest struggles with keeping people here for weather reasons and a variety of things. But in the Midwest, you have Iowa, you have Michigan, you have Indiana that are right to work states, Wisconsin, right to work state, you have Minnesota, Illinois, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, they're non-right to work states. The right to work states in the Midwest are growing faster than the non-right to work states. So even when you're looking at a regional level, that gives you the overall picture of it is a big important part of getting jobs to come to a place and to get families and people to move in.
Which is probably why this is not a card to repeal right to work that she wants to probably play just yet. I think she's gonna wait maybe 6 months or so and do something else.
Maybe. Hopefully she holds off indefinitely, but we'll see.
Right. In the time we have, I want you to explain for the viewers a little bit about sort of the public versus private as it relates to right to work. I mean, the reality is that federal law, and I don't know if this is new, but already makes it illegal for someone to join a union. So whether she repeals it or not, someone still can't join the union, right? Can you kind of walk us through public versus private?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing to understand is technically overall no one has to be a member of a union. You could withdraw. My father was a public school teacher and he had worked in construction, but when he was a public school teacher, he could technically withdraw from the union and he could avoid paying the direct political costs, about 10% of his dues. However, he had to pay 90% of them as fees to the union. The right to work law says, nope, altogether you can withdraw completely. There was a Supreme Court case in 2018 that said whether to join or support labor unions at all, which are political organizations, is a First Amendment right. So for public sector workers, state employees, teachers, school employees, police, fire, local government, they are not affected by this. They cannot be forced to contribute to a union against their will because they have a First Amendment right. Private sector workers can be. So most of what we're talking about here is UAW, construction, road builders, nurses, some of those areas that can get unionized and forcing them to go back in and contribute to unions. But about 60,000 private sector workers have withdrawn their union membership. So you're still talking tens of thousands of people that if the law is repealed are forced right back into contributing to labor unions.
At the Mackinac Center, I know you've done a variety of polls on this issue. Can, in general, kind of give us a sense as to how those polls what the outcomes of those have been?
Yeah, we commissioned a recent poll statewide from an independent pollster, and it found right to work is favored about 2-1 by Michiganders. But there have been more than a dozen polls over the last 10 or 15 years from liberal organizations, conservative business groups, and almost every poll finds that it's a popular law. News media, they often do that poll around Labor Day. So, that'll be the interesting thing for the legislature. It's a law that's popular. It's affecting tens of thousands of people. And are you going to kind of go against the will of those people who've withdrawn and the will of the general population? But again, like I said, I mean, this is a major funder of one political party. And so there's a lot of reasons, money reasons, to go back and repeal the law for them as well.
Important issue. We'll continue to follow it. And for viewers that want more information on that issue, learn about you and your team, where can they go find it?
www.mackinac.org. You can find our work on this and many other policy issues.
Excellent. Jared, nice to see you. We'll see you again the next time. And that's our show for tonight, but be sure to join us again next Tuesday night for the follow-up. We will take on the immigration crisis. Now that President Biden visited the border for the first time, what does it mean to mid-Michigan? That's next week on the follow-up. Have a great night, everyone.